I did not. I did not. Okay. What's good, YouTube? So my chat has linked me an interesting video of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia. Video made by Into the Shadows. Schizophrenia, the most horrifying mental illness. Cause like we like learning about mental health and other mental diseases to like, to be on common ground with our fellow man so we can understand what they might be going through. You never know when you need to identify somebody is schizophrenic. You know? You might need to know these skills or whatever. But let's just get into it, chat. I mean, YouTube. You know what I'm saying?
A homeless man on the streets of Mexico City who believes he is the son of God. A young Indonesian woman who seems to be frozen, her muscles refusing to move and her face showing no expression. An American college student whose life is deteriorating as he lives in fear that the CIA is trying to abduct him and sell his organs to interdimensional aliens. Despite sounding like these three people couldn't be more different from each other, they all share one thing in common: a diagnosis of schizophrenia. It's a disease you've likely heard of already, whether from a movie or a TV show, or simply because its name is so widespread. After all, it's one of the most debilitating mental illnesses in existence, and there's certainly no shortage of horror stories that have resulted from its symptoms, so perhaps its infamy is well earned. But the Hollywood portrayal, as well as the public's general knowledge, tends to be wildly exaggerated while simultaneously seeming only to scratch the surface of this incredibly complex disorder. It's a mysterious disease that dramatically affects one's mood, behavior, personality, and their very perception of reality. So today, we're gonna unravel the twisted web of symptoms, horrors, and hope for those with schizophrenia, a true monster of the mind. Now, before we get into the symptoms that generally denote schizophrenia, let's make a couple of things really clear. Firstly, schizophrenia is not dissociative identity disorder, or DID, which you may know by its previous name, multiple personality disorder. This is a...
Oh, wow. Okay, learning something new. So it's called DID, not multiple personality disorder now.
Now, before we get into the symptoms that generally denote schizophrenia, let's make a couple of things really clear. Firstly, schizophrenia is not dissociative identity disorder, or DID, which you may know by its previous name, multiple personality disorder. This is a completely different diagnosis, but there is this common misconception that having multiple personalities and randomly switching between them is a symptom of schizophrenia, which it is not. Additionally, this video will include details of some of the crimes committed under the grip of this disorder, so we should say viewer discretion is advised, but we'd also like to clarify that not everyone who suffers from schizophrenia is a violent person, and the symptoms do not always lead to violent actions. We're going to get deeper into this at the end of the video, but it's important not...
This disclaimer is so long-winded. Got you. I'm going to pull it up now because this video is long and... I'm gonna pull it up now, so yeah, we can watch it later. And this is a fat ass disclaimer.
But we'd also like to clarify that not everyone who suffers from schizophrenia is a violent person, and the symptoms do not always lead to violent actions. We're going to get deeper into this at the end of the video, but it's important not to spread the myth that every single person with schizophrenia is a danger to themselves and to others. And a final note, if you suspect that someone you know is suffering from schizophrenia, don't attempt to diagnose others or even self-diagnose yourself. This should always be done by a mental health professional, as many of the symptoms we're going to cover today overlap with other mental illnesses such as depression or anxiety. And with that out of the way, let's jump in. The latest models of diagnostic criteria divide the main symptoms most associated with schizophrenia into two separate categories: positive and negative. And no, this doesn't mean there are good and bad symptoms. The terms positive and negative refer to the phenomena that are either present when they shouldn't be in a normal individual, or behaviors that are absent when they would appear in an unaffected person. So let's start off with the positive or present symptoms. The most well-known and widely depicted of these is sensory hallucinations. These can affect any of the body's senses, but the most commonly reported one is auditory, which usually includes the patient hearing voices voices in their head. These voices can be anything from benevolent and soft-spoken to screaming, raging, violent, and demanding. There can even be more than one voice at a time, leading them to argue with each other for dominance, and sometimes the voices are even interactive, meaning the patient can ask them a question and receive an answer. But it's important to remember these voices by themselves aren't the only symptom in schizophrenia. They're almost always accompanied by a seriously altered state of reality. If you or I suddenly hear a voice in our head demanding that we murder the person next to us during our morning commute on the train, we'd be more than likely to dismiss it as a startling hallucination and then get ourselves checked out by a doctor. In fact, hearing voices can accompany a very normal person going through something like a rough spell of anxiety. But for someone with schizophrenia, these commands they hear from the voices can be as real as the world around them, and they can have a strong influence on someone's actions, as the person often feels persuaded or even compelled to obey them after some time. Take, for instance, the tragic story of a 33-year-old woman from Texas, whose name we'll leave out, who in June 2009 had recently given birth to a baby boy. She had been diagnosed with postpartum depression, a relatively common mood disorder that affects 1 in every 10 mothers, but things took a serious turn from the worse when she began experiencing vivid auditory hallucinations. And when the boy was just a few weeks old...
Hold the fuck up. Postpartum depression affects 1 out of 10 of every mother, right? Why do I always hear about every woman talk about postpartum depression like they have it? I thought everybody gets postpartum. I thought every woman gets postpartum depression after a baby. 1 out of every 10. So it's 99% chance. These women been lying. These women on the internet been lying. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say.
Left the house to check herself into hospital, where she reported hearing voices. After this, everything spiraled out of control. She checked herself out of the hospital, drove home, and against the wishes of the baby's father, threw the baby into the car and sped off, apparently to go and stay at her mother's. The father had no idea what was going on and was even more confused when she called him to say that she'd met someone new and never wanted to see him again. Then a couple of days later, she and the baby reappeared at the house. The father was initially ecstatic that the family was being reunited, but sadly, this would be the last day of his baby's life. Later that night, just after 1 a.m., the woman murdered her own son by decapitating him with a steak knife, and after that, she proceeded to eat parts of his body, including the brain, the toes, and the nose. After her subsequent arrest, she told detectives that the devil had been speaking to her and had made her commit the atrocities, a telltale sign of schizophrenia.
Gee, that was just so fucking heavy, bro. I just wanted to crawl away and die. That's heavy. Bro, what the fuck? You decapitated him, ate his brain, ate his face, ate his nose, and his toes? Bro, I'm saying, that was so unexpected. I was not expecting all of that, G. I was not expecting all of that. I don't even know how, like, if you the husband, like, how do you ever trust a person again? How do you lay down with another person again? You lost your one and only son to the woman you love. And he probably never knew she had schizophrenia. And if I'm the husband, I'm like, bitch, you did that to our son. What's stopping you from just waking up and like, I'm gonna fucking kill you now? Arf.
Schizophrenia, which it was later discovered she had been diagnosed with the year before. Now, what's particularly interesting in this case is that the malevolent voice presented itself as the devil. This is likely because the woman was known to be a devout Jehovah's Witness, and so the concept of a devil was familiar to her. This is, in fact, a common theme across many types of symptoms. They often reflect one's cultural upbringing. So, while in this case the woman thought that the devil was the entity speaking with her, others might think they are hearing the voice of God, their ancestors, or even aliens. The second most common sensory hallucination is visual. These can be full-on visions with religious figures, ghosts, and vivid scenery in strange locations, or they can be as simple as appearing or disappearing objects and people throughout someone's day-to-day life. Some people react.
But you know what they say? They say some people with schizophrenia okay, that was don't worry about that. They say some people with schizophrenia can talk to the other side. Like, I heard that from people I grew up with. They say a lot of people they know with schizophrenia can talk to that other place, which is crazy as fuck. But then it's like, how can I believe you? You have schizophrenia. How am I supposed to believe you? You know what I'm saying?
To these with awe and wonder, believing that they are truly witnessing something extraordinary and perhaps rather.
Well, and they say most witch doctors, most witch doctors, voodoo doctors, and witches and all that shit might be schizophrenic. And then you got one schizophrenic person telling the whole tribe, Wookie, 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 Wookie. And now everybody, Wookie, 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 Wookie. That's so fucked up, but I just did. I'm not gonna lie.
Pleasant, while others are less fortunate and are subject to utter terror and fright when terrifying, reality-shattering hallucinations come and go with no warning. Less common than auditory and visual hallucinations are those of touch, smell, and taste, which aren't seen with nearly the same frequency but are still a possible symptom. And interestingly, patients are more likely to experience hallucinations involving two or more senses than they are to experience events with just a single sense. So you could probably imagine how convincing they can be. Another positive symptom, one that is a hallmark of schizophrenia, is delusions. These delusions come in a variety of forms, but we'll start with delusions of grandeur. Delusions of grandeur cause the patient to believe that they are either of extreme royal importance to the world, inconceivably intelligent, or in some cases, even a divine being. These beliefs can also be seen in someone who has narcissistic personality disorder or is in a manic phase of a bipolar episode, but they're generally more extreme in patients with schizophrenia. Someone suffering from these delusions as a symptom of schizophrenia might regard themselves as a misunderstood genius who could solve all of the world's problems if they had enough power, or in more severe cases, they might even think they are an important religious figure, such as the literal.
Wait, hold on. Buddy, you think you cool? What you think you hold on.
Could solve all of the world's problems
Not you.
if
You
they had
like
enough
a good
power.
guy. Folks, you think you cool, folks? Look at this posh fuck. I don't like the cut of his fucking jib. I don't like this guy. Bro, I see him come up on the screen and everything had to stop for me. I don't like his fucking face. I don't like this guy. What? He just think he's so fuck. Look how he hit the. Bro, look how you're hitting it, G. I don't fucking like this guy.
They might even think they are an important religious figure, such as the literal reincarnation of Jesus himself. These types of delusions might sound more like a thorn in the side of social skills and less of a danger, but they can in fact lead to violence in some cases, and there are even multiple examples of this in recent news. Take, for instance, a man from Utah who was recently charged with 2 counts of murder. The people he killed in June were complete strangers to him, and the murders took place in 2 different cities, with him not even attempting to hide the bodies, one of which he stabbed in a grocery store parking lot, and the other he assaulted and then hanged with gym equipment. Once arrested, he claimed he was doing his duty to purge the cities. Whatever he was purging them from isn't exactly clear, but he said that he knew it was his noble responsibility to bear, bestowed upon him by some vague higher power. But not all delusions of grandeur pose a threat to others. In fact, some of them pose the greatest threat to the one experiencing the delusions. Believing themselves to be the chosen one or something equally mystical, patients can seriously.
I used to hear about like the I guess they'll call him the village idiot that believing they can fly and jumping off a fucking cliff. So like, if you Yeah, how the fuck do you hang somebody with gym weights? I guess you like tie the rope to they shit and then and then the weight drop and it hang they fucking body. But okay, back to what he was saying about like how it could be harmful to you, right? I used to hear stories about motherfuckers really believing they can fly and then jumping off shit and breaking everything or killing themselves and some more shit. So damn, because schizophrenia can't be new. It's just that we are just now identifying it.
Seriously think they've become invincible, causing them to take immense risks, like walking in front of speeding traffic. Other examples of this delusion include things like a patient believing that they're a top secret spy reporting directly to the President of the United States, or that they are in fact the true president and an imposter has taken their place. Again, this sounds completely outlandish to most of us, but no amount of casual reasoning or asking for evidence will do much to change a person's mind when they're suffering from one of these delusions. But of all the delusions one can suffer from, the most textbook type are persecutory delusions. These are the stereotypical everyone's out to get me types of beliefs that many people immediately associate.
Oh, they would do fucked up shit to you. You say, Chad said, what would they do to you if you had schizophrenia back in the day? They used to do shock therapy. They used to think being gay was part of it. Was a part of mental illness. They used to think being gay, body dysmorphia. Well, body dysmorphia is a mental illness, but they would do shock therapy. I heard about back in the old days, they used to like, wouldn't they kill you? Maybe not, because if you see how many symptoms of these are just in regular people, like how would you know if I told you I was the Messiah back in the day? How would you fucking know I wasn't? Well, most motherfuckers wouldn't believe it. You would have to do some grandiose shit. But no, you gotta remember, nobody believed Jesus that he was Jesus until he started doing shit. That he had to gain followers. You start gaining followers and people start telling your legend, you know, telling your stories. That's only, But like they used to, like the way they used to pick and prod at people's brains back in the day is like, it's insane to even think about. Like they used to really cut somebody whole shit off and poke at their brain and watch shit move. You never know. They used to do a lot of fucked up experiments in the name of science. It was really just a bunch of serial killers doing shit to people. If we want to keep it a buck, if we keeping it a thou wow. Like if you want to look up something fucked up, there's this one nigga who used to I'm forgetting his name, but he used to torture dogs. Like shit be something, boy.
With the disorder, and for good reason. During the first onset of serious symptoms known as the first episode of psychosis, up to 70% of all patients experience some form of persecutory delusion. These can be anything from thinking everyone in the grocery store is carefully monitoring and reporting their every move, all the way to firmly believing that the CIA has implanted microchips in the birds that are chirping outside their house every morning. Oftentimes, these persecutory delusions will have something specifically related to the patient's thoughts, such as the devil is stealing my thoughts, or on the flip side, the government is implanting thoughts into my head. Patients will often be extremely suspicious of everyone, even those they've known for a long time and previously trusted. In fact, the center of these persecutions doesn't even necessarily have to be the person with the disorder. In March 2022, a man in the UK escaped from his hospital ward and tracked down his father, who he proceeded to assault by punching and kicking him and finally stomping him. And why?
Ooh, fuck.
patients will often be extremely suspicious of everyone, even those they've known for a long time and previously trusted. In fact, the center of these persecutions doesn't even necessarily have to be the person with the disorder. In March 2022, a man in the UK escaped from his hospital ward and tracked down his father, who he proceeded to assault by punching and kicking him, and finally stomping him. And why? Because thanks to this type of delusion, he had become completely convinced that his father was planning to attack his mother, despite absolutely no history of violence in the family, and he decided that he had to take matters into his own hands. The father tragically died a few weeks later of his injuries. One interesting way these delusions can be discovered is when a person files a police report seeking protection from a stalker. However, upon investigating, the police find that no such stalker even exists, and that the person filing the report hasn't even seen their face. They simply know that they're being watched. In the past, if a patient's main symptoms were these types of paranoid persecutory delusions, they would have been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but in recent years, this diagnosis has been completely removed, and instead, general paranoia is merely one of the positive symptoms under schizophrenia's broader umbrella. So, that's about it for positive symptoms, usually coming down to various types of hallucinations and delusions. These are the ones most popular in the media, the ones other people are most likely to notice, and often the ones that are most likely to get someone in trouble with the law. But these are only one side of the schizophrenic coin.
Leave me alone! Go to motionray.com to add this to your video, and that, and that.
Ad coming in 2 minutes. You're gonna get smacked with an ad.
Negative symptoms are behaviors or phenomena that are absent or diminished, and they often begin emerging in someone before the positive symptoms begin to take effect, in some cases, even years in advance. One of the most commonly experienced negative symptoms is abolition, or extreme apathy and a severe lack of motivation. This usually manifests itself as missing school, falling behind at work, and losing all interest in self-care, such as showering, brushing teeth, or eating properly. Unfortunately, to others, this behavior is often interpreted as simple laziness, and not much compassion is given at a time when it could seriously help. This, along with becoming increasingly asocial, can damage important relationships with friends and family in someone's life, and because they lack any desire to repair them, this can leave someone more and more isolated in their social withdrawal as the symptoms increase in severity. And to top it all off, these symptoms are often accompanied by anhedonia, a total lack of pleasure, or even alogia, a decline in speech complexity. Along with being seen as just general laziness or odd behavior, some of the social withdrawal, lack of self-care, and absent sex drive can be misinterpreted by some people as depression, because these by themselves are classic symptoms of major depressive disorder. But it's when combined with a few other negative symptoms that schizophrenia is really set apart from other mental illnesses, and that's the way it causes people to express their emotions. One half of this is blunted affect, a condition where a patient fails to express emotion at all, whether it be positive or negative. Remember, it's not depression, where the mood is mostly negative, and it's not a side effect of medication. Their mood is just overly neutral, regardless of the situation. In most serious cases, something like the news of the death of a loved one would elicit no response. Their face would remain straight, no tears would form, their voice wouldn't change pitch or volume. None of the responses associated with emotional expression, but it gets even stranger. Instead of showing no emotion whatsoever, schizophrenia can also cause inappropriate affect, where compared to showing nothing, the person definitely shows emotion, just the wrong one. Imagine being in a funeral full of people and someone suddenly begins quietly chuckling to themselves. This is called paradoxical laughter, and it's been recorded in patients with schizophrenia since the 1940s. Many of them report feeling tension in their heads as they try to work out which emotion will surface and end up laughing as a way to relieve the tension, while others are completely unable to explain why they're suddenly amused. Even stronger still, another negative symptom.
So it's like a headache, and then to release the fucking headache, you have to laugh. Fuck, is you the Joker? I'm sorry. It's a real mental illness. I apologize. I forget. You ain't see shit.
Is lack of normal muscle movement. This can range from strange jerking arm motions all the way to complete catatonia, where a person is frozen in a trance-like state and barely moves for hours on end. This can be so extreme that a person can resemble a statue more than a living being, even in somewhat disturbing positions with their arms raised up in the air that would be incredibly painful for the rest of us to hold for extended periods of time. If left undisturbed, these long periods of immobility can cause permanent muscle issues, lung complications, and the patient may even refuse to swallow food or water during an episode. If left untreated completely, the more serious cases can even result in death. Even in instances where the catatonia doesn't last for, let's say, days on end, it can still appear with alarming frequency, with some patients reporting having shorter frozen states multiple times a week or even day. Now, there are a few symptoms which don't fall neatly into this positive-negative bundle that we've described, which are the cognitive issues that have been observed to accompany schizophrenia. This includes general issues with something called neurocognition. Put simply, neurocognition is the brain's ability to process information. So patients with schizophrenia are commonly seen to have issues with things like remembering and repeating a short string of words. Their reaction time can be significantly slowed, and they can even have a very difficult time understanding what's going on in optical illusions. It's pretty clear to see how these symptoms would seriously affect someone's day-to-day functioning and their ability to hold a job. But of these cognitive issues, some of the most debilitating are those regarding speech. This falls partly under the negative symptoms, where some patients stop speaking in long sentences and instead use short, quick responses. But it goes much deeper than that. In severe cases, speech can be reduced to something known as a word salad, a seemingly random pile of unrelated words jumbled into a sentence, such as friend, menu, glasses, ride, tree, blanket, Jupiter. Another form of word salad called clanging is when someone's speech gets random.
Whoa, that just fucked up my dyslexia. Friend, menu, glasses, ride, tree, blanket, Jupiter.
Another form of word salad called clanging is when someone's speech gets randomly stuck in a loop or rhythm of rhyming, such as, today I woke up and then I went to the store, chore, floor, more door for. These are rather bizarre, but at least they're words. In more severe cases, the person could become completely unintelligible, muttering to themselves endlessly with little ability to communicate whatsoever.
That's one hell of a mental disease to develop. How do you explain that your schizophrenia make you rap, my nigga? How do you explain that?
You destroyed an enemy cruiser.
Finally, I can skip the ad, goddammit. It's a long ass shit, bro. Fuck.
So, that's a lot of symptoms, a lot of wild, intense symptoms that vary in intensity and expression. But you feel fine right now. You're watching this video, you understand it, you can move your limbs freely, and you don't have regular hallucinations. So, you're safe, right? Well, this is perhaps the most terrifying part of schizophrenia. It can happen to anyone. Generally, the onset of the disease occurs between the late teens and the early 30s, with males usually in their early 20s and
Your McFlurry is here, W. Shut up. Bro, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that. Don't tell me I can just form schizophrenia.
terrifying part of schizophrenia. It can happen to anyone. Generally, the onset of the disease occurs between the late teens and the early 30s, with males usually in their early 20s and females averaging in the late 20s. Less often it can occur before adulthood, known as early onset, and it can even appear as late as one's 50s. It's possible that it develops even later, such as in one's 70s, but at that point, it's difficult to tell the symptoms apart from those of other conditions that come with an aging mind. But here's the scary part. Its onset has been known to be sudden. In many cases, the symptoms gradually develop over years before a diagnosis takes place, but sometimes, about 25% of the time, it happens rapidly. Imagine going to bed one night, the only worry on your mind being a tough exam the next week or an extra long shift at work. When you wake up, you now have a voice in your head that narrates your every move. It talks to you, it argues with you, and it even screams at you. But most importantly, it doesn't seem to go away day.
This got scary as fuck. This just got. I'm dead ass scared right now. G. I'm speechless. I don't know what to say, G. I am so fucking scared. I'm so fucking scared right now, G. Oh, I need to pray. I need to pray. at that point, I'll jump off a cliff in GTA. Thanks. That's scary, G. This just got so scary. This just got terrifying. This will be on the back of my mind. At any day, I will randomly, because I already talked to myself, G, in my mind. I answer my did I do this? Woo. No, yeah. Okay. But no, I don't know about that. I talk in my own mind. So to think that another voice gonna join that bitch is crazy. Another voice gonna join that bitch sounds crazy to me.
After day, this unfortunately is a reality for many who have a sudden onset. For the other 75%, the signs of schizophrenia develop slowly over years, with negative symptoms and cognitive problems usually manifesting first and eventually progressing into the positive symptoms
That
of
look like
psychosis.
a drug addict. I don't know about no fucking. He looked doped out. I ain't gonna lie to you. That looks like a meth head, you know?
The National Institute of Mental Health estimates that schizophrenia affects around 0.5% of the population of the United States, though other estimates often place it at a full 1%. That might sound like a small number, but it means that in the United States there are as many as 3 million people or more living with the disorder. Treatments of this disorder sees mixed results. Antipsychotics are generally prescribed, and these can be quite effective at handling the hallucinations and the delusions, but they don't work for everyone, and they come with a whole host of nasty side effects, including an increased risk of developing diabetes and involuntary muscle twitching. About half of all patients who take antipsychotics will respond well to them, but the symptoms rarely disappear entirely. This is why it's important for the medication to be accompanied by another form of treatment, such as cognitive behavioral therapy or family therapy, in order to learn how to manage day-to-day life with the symptoms. But getting someone to do all of this is another problem in itself, as between 30 and 50% of all people diagnosed deny there is anything wrong with them and outright refuse treatment. In patients deemed to be a danger to themselves or others, this refusal of treatment can be overridden by a court order, and doctors can administer courses of forcefully injected antipsychotics, which sounds like a nightmare, and it's most certainly horrifying for the person restrained to the chair. Perhaps in the future, better treatments will become available as we learn more about what causes schizophrenia, because at the moment, the cause of the disorder remains pretty murky. What we do know for sure is that there is some genetic component, as your chance of developing the disorder goes up to 13% if you have a parent with it, and up to a staggering 40% if you have an identical twin with it. One woman in the 1930s gave birth to quadruplets who all developed schizophrenia, and the odds of this happening by random chance without genetics at play are unfathomably slim. But doctors of studies have still failed to find any specific genes that can be associated with the disorder on a consistent basis. The best guess at the moment is that there simply isn't a single cause. It's likely that the DNA you inherited from your parents can give you a genetic predisposition to the disorder, and this vulnerability can be turned on or activated by experiences in life or exposure to certain chemicals such as various drugs. Of these drugs, cannabis seems to be a big one. There are lots of studies on this, but one example is from Sweden, where researchers found that those who use cannabis regularly are 6 times more likely to develop schizophrenia than the
I gotta hear that again.
in life or exposure to certain chemicals such as various drugs. Of these drugs, cannabis seems to be a big one. There are lots of studies on this, but one example is from Sweden, where researchers found that those who use cannabis regularly are 6 times more likely to develop schizophrenia than the average person. This doesn't mean that smoking a joint or two will set you on a path to psychosis, but it does mean that if you have the elusive genetic factor, whatever it may be, cannabis and other substances may make it more likely to become active in you.
Hey, wait. But, hey, wait. Think about it like this, though. I smoke every day. You would have thought it's... I'm not... Knock on wood. I don't even want to finish this fucking video no more. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I'm gonna keep it a non-Billy thou. I don't even want to finish the fucking video no more. Cause nigga, who are your sources? State your source. I ain't never heard no shit like that. And I do studies on weed all the fucking time. Bro, we gotta see it through. We gotta see it through for YouTube, chat. We gotta see it through.
Along with substance use, there are a few other things that researchers are pretty confident in linking to developing schizophrenia. For example, living in an urban environment as opposed to the countryside makes your chances of developing much higher, as does a history of child abuse.
Fuck. Fuck.
Recent immigration to a new country, and poverty. All of these seem to be strongly associated with stress levels, so it's probably a connection with high levels of stress, especially in adolescence. As for specific life events that can trigger the onset, giving birth seems to be one of the most commonly observed. A famous case in the early 2000s featured a woman who seemed to be entirely normal, at least to her friends and family. When she married her husband, they announced that they'd have as many babies as nature would allow, and true to their words, after just a few years, they had 4 of them. But after the 4th delivery, something in the mother changed. Her husband found her shaking in the corner and chewing on her fingers, oblivious to the world around her. And after she attempted suicide, she was put on antipsychotics, which seemed to do the trick, as everything generally went back to normal. But this was only temporary. She soon relapsed into psychotic states and had to be institutionalized twice in 1999. She was originally diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. When she was eventually released, her psychiatrist begged her not to have any more kids, as it would be too high of a risk for her mental health. Just 7 weeks later, though, they conceived the next child, who was born in 2000. After this 5th birth, she stopped taking her meds, began obsessively reading the Bible, and entered catatonic states with increasing frequency. This all culminated when one day her husband left for work, leaving his wife with a single hour before her other caretaker arrived. Sadly, one unsupervised hour was all she needed to drown all 5 of her kids, one by one.
You devote yourself to God. But I don't know what that battle was like. I don't even want to judge this woman because I don't know what that battle is like in your mind. I don't know what that battle is like inside her mind. That's a real, like, she fighting real demons. I don't know how she fighting that battle and how she got there. Like, that's probably how she probably started reading the Bible more to try to fight that battle. It won in the end. Man.
In the bathtub. She later told the court that killing them before they lived a sinful life was the only way to save them from hell. She had experienced depression as a teenager, perhaps the negative symptoms beginning long in advance, but she was stable and happy, even doing her best to homeschool her kids. The positive symptoms and intense delusions seemed to all spiral out of control just after the birth of her 4th child. But again, most of these correlations are just that. They're correlations. A more concrete target are dopamine receptors. One theory posits that those with schizophrenia have too many of these dopamine receptors, or they're simply faulty, which does a few things to their brain, and we'll try to keep this as simple as possible. Firstly, dopamine is the neurotransmitter or brain chemical associated with things like motivation, reward, and mood. If these pathways are overloaded or not working, basic day-to-day actions and reward sequences like showering or cleaning might seem pointless, behavior often noticed among the negative symptoms. Additionally, it's thought by some researchers that these high levels of dopamine can affect our mind's internal filter, which could be responsible for many of the positive symptoms such as delusions and hallucinations. This could also be why antipsychotic medications generally work for these stronger positive symptoms, as many of them reduce dopamine levels in the brain. The links between dopamine and schizophrenia go all the way back to the 1960s, when antipsychotics were first beginning to be introduced. But it's not the complete picture. There are other neurotransmitters involved, and some patients have even totally normal levels of dopamine, so it clearly isn't the only cause. But it is a step in the right direction, and if the disorder truly does have a large biological aspect, it can mean that there's hope for a future cure. So, we might have painted modern-day treatment here in a bad way. It's true that for many people, medication simply doesn't work, and that for others, therapy is no help either. And it's certainly true that some just refuse to be treated at all. But schizophrenia isn't a death sentence, and there is hope for those in its clutches. With proper support and specialized treatment, especially if the treatment occurs early on, it's possible to manage the symptoms, and those affected even recover and go on to lead a fairly normal life. Eleanor Longden, for example, was a college student when she was suddenly subjected to terrifying voices in her head, spiraling her life into hospitalizations, various drugs, and a diagnosis of schizophrenia. But through years of battling with her symptoms, Eleanor was able to learn to manage and cope with them, and even went on to earn a master's degree in psychology, hoping to inspire and help others with similar struggles, eventually leading to her giving a TED Talk on the subject. It's quite a recovery. And as mentioned at the beginning of this video, not everyone with schizophrenia...
The thing is, she could always spiral. And that's what's scary. She could always spiral.
is violent. In fact, the majority of patients diagnosed with the disease are actually far more likely to become the victim of violence themselves than to harm someone else. People with schizophrenia are more likely to die at a younger age from heart failure, and nearly 5% of them commit suicide. They're more likely to be scammed, more likely to be alone, and far more likely to end up homeless or in prison. This is all along with the immense financial burden that can accompany it. Not only the direct costs of healthcare and medication, but also the indirect cost of earning less money due to a lack of productivity or difficulty holding a job. These are people that, instead of being ostracized, desperately need all the help that society can offer them.
Meet Grammarly Go, your go-to solution.
Yeah, I gotta give props to folks who made this again.
A movie or a TV show, or
Into the Shadows. Banger vid. Banger. A fucking banger. I just watch these dumbass fucking memes.